It's common knowledge that tenderizing steaks often makes them tastier, but you may not know that tenderizing goes way beyond just hitting a piece of meat with a hammer. Piercing steak with a fork can have a similar effect to pounding it with a meat mallet, but with much less effort. Poking holes in beef tears apart the tough connective tissue and muscle that make it chewy, and can enhance the penetration of marinades into the meat. But exercise caution and avoid excessively puncturing tender cuts like ribeye, as it may result in a mushy texture. While you may have to poke quite a few holes on both sides of the meat for this to work, it's still a relatively fast way of softening beef that's employed by many chefs. You can use standard kitchen utensils, but if you prefer a faster tenderization method and anticipate doing this frequently, you may want to invest in a tenderizer. But not all chefs agree that puncturing steak with a fork is the best method of tenderizing beef. The website Pro Family Chef claims that piercing raw meat can result in the loss of juices and overall flavor. Other chefs also contend that piercing meat can introduce bacteria into the steak if it's not cooked at a temperature above 155 degrees. While sprinkling steak with salt makes the meat more flavorful, the seasoning can also soften the meat by breaking down any tough muscles and fibers close to the surface. But you may not know that applying baking soda to beef can be just as effective, if not better, at tenderizing the meat. This is due to baking soda altering the beef's chemistry. Instead of breaking up stringy connective tissues, baking soda raises the pH levels of the meat's surface, a process known among chefs as velveting. Velveting helps to stop the proteins inside the meat from bonding together and toughening the meat during cooking. According to Patricia S. York from Southern Living, baking soda can tenderize beef even faster than salt. York claims that marinating steak for 15 to 20 minutes in a baking soda brine is sufficient to tenderize steak, compared to a salt brine which only starts to soften meat after 30 minutes. Meat can also be left in baking soda longer than salt without fear of it turning mushy. And to achieve optimal tenderness, Tasting Table advises that you should calculate the weight of the meat and use 1% of that weight in baking soda to create your brine. When it comes to tenderizing beef, cornstarch is similar to baking soda. Velveting beef in a cornstarch slurry is often used by chefs in Chinese restaurants to soften meat prior to stir-frying. It can stop the proteins in the meat from seizing up during cooking by making the outside of the meat more alkaline. Cornstarch creates a shield that can lock in moisture, stopping the meat from overcooking and toughening. While there are different recipes for cornstarch-based marinades, a version on Kikkoman's official website calls for corn flour, whisked egg whites, table salt, and sesame oil or rice wine. Other common ingredients include oyster sauce, rice vinegar, and Shaoxing wine. While marinating in cornstarch, it's common for the raw meat to take on a vibrant red hue. This is normal. To prevent any clumping, pop the meat in a colander and rinse the marinade off with running water before cooking.
Genius!
Alternatively, according to Food Network, some professional chefs recommend briefly submerging the marinated beef in peanut oil while it cooks on the stove. Soda is a popular, if somewhat unusual, tenderizing tool because of its high acidity, which is great for breaking down connective tissue and tenderizing meat. For comparison, grapefruit has a pH level of 3.38, lemons have a level of 2.3, and limes are 2.4. Meanwhile, the pH level for soft drinks generally falls somewhere between 2 and 4, depending on the type of soda you're using. Beyond its tenderizing capabilities, soda can also imbue steak with a distinctive flavor. Colas can infuse meat with a caramel flavor, cream sodas with vanilla, and lemon or lime-infused sodas lend a hint of citrus. Additionally, the sugars that are present in soft drinks can contribute to caramelization during cooking, adding a desirable crust and color to the exterior of the meat. Various cooking publications offer up different recommendations for marinating times when using soda, while some chefs suggest that the meat can be immersed in a soda marinade for a maximum of 8 hours. Tasting Table proposes an extended marinating time of up to 24 hours. If you've got the time, it may be best to experiment with different marinating times to find the one that best suits your taste preferences. While you probably wouldn't score an expensive tenderloin, using a knife to score tougher cuts of meat, such as flank steak or skirt steak, before you start cooking can do wonders to enhance the tenderness. For best results, Good Housekeeping recommends you start by making small 1/8 inch incisions across the meat grain. Next, slice the meat perpendicular to the initial cuts, resulting in a crisscross pattern, and repeat on the opposite side. This scoring method physically cuts through the rope-like muscle fibers that run through the meat's surface that make it chewy. Scoring meat can also bring a number of other benefits. It increases the steak's surface area and lets seasoning and marinade penetrate deeper into the cut. And making slits in the steak creates edges that will caramelize during the searing process, increasing the cut's flavor, texture, and overall appeal. Soaking meat in a marinade can both tenderize and add flavor to the final dish, largely due to acidic ingredients providing a robust flavor while breaking down connective tissues. While apple cider vinegar and wine are go-to ingredients to increase the acidity of marinades, adding a puree made from acidic fruits, such as pineapple, mangoes, and papayas, can also transform chewy meat into a tender treat.
Wow, that's incredible.
For the best outcome, add 1 to 2 tablespoons of fruit puree for each cup of marinade you are using. According to Cuisine at Home, thin cuts of meat shouldn't sit in the marinade for longer than 3 hours, and thicker cuts, such as steak, for longer than 6 hours. However, Masterclass recommends checking the meat periodically to ensure that it doesn't become overly soft. If you notice the edges of the steak starting to cook, it's time to remove it from the marinade. Preparing beef in a slow cooker is particularly well-suited for tough cuts, such as brisket and chuck, since the process breaks down stringy muscle fibers, ideally resulting in a fall-off-the-bone tenderness. This is because tough cuts of steak are filled with collagen, which requires prolonged cooking times for the collagen to dissolve into gelatin. This imbues the beef with rich flavor and silky texture. Even if the beef happens to dry out a little during the slow cooking process, the gelatin will likely make up for it. Science of Cooking recommends slow cooking beef with broth or water at the highest setting for an hour, then reducing the temperature to low. The resulting steam will help to break down any muscle fibers and keep the meat juicy, while the low heat will make it less likely the beef will overcook. Be sure to leave plenty of time for the flavors to meld and develop, which can take around 4 hours depending on the size of the cut. If you like your steak tender on the inside and crispy on the outside, then reverse-searing has you covered. This method involves slowly cooking the steak at a low temperature in the oven, then searing it to create a flavorful crust. Heating in the oven at low temperatures not only prevents overcooking, but also activates the enzymes responsible for softening meat tissue. While traditional slow cooking works best for tougher cuts of beef, reverse-searing can be used with marbled and tender pieces of steak. While it bakes in the oven, monitor the cut with a meat thermometer until it reaches your desired internal temperature. According to MLS, this internal temperature should be around 105 degrees Fahrenheit for rare meat, 115 degrees for medium rare, 125 degrees for medium, and 135 degrees for medium well done. This process should take between 20 and 40 minutes. Once out of the oven, sear the steak in a hot pan until well browned on both sides. Since time in the oven tends to leave the surface of the beef dry, it should be easy to achieve a flavorful crust. In addition, it's important to note that searing the steak won't cook the interior of the meat any further, so you'll need to ensure your desired level of doneness during the initial oven cooking.
Ugh, this steak isn't cooked at all.
One of the greatest benefits of sous vide cooking lies in its ability to trap moisture within the food, leaving it both juicy and flavorful. This cooking technique involves placing food inside an airtight, heat-safe plastic bag and submerging it in water set to a specific temperature. Not surprisingly, this cooking method also works quite well for steak. Immersing beef in water at a consistently low temperature over an extended period of time helps to break down the collagen in the meat. Preparing meat in this way also ensures that your steak is perfectly cooked to your desired level. With the right machine, you won't need to cut into the steak or use a meat thermometer to see if it's done. If you set your sous vide machine to 129 degrees Fahrenheit and cook it for 2 hours, you'll get a perfectly cooked medium rare steak. If you want your steak cooked more or less, just adjust the water temperature. Once your steak is ready, place it in a hot pan for a short time to sear the exterior. As tempting as it may be to dig into your steak immediately after you remove it from the heat, step back for a few minutes before cutting into it. This is because when the meat is cooked, the juices concentrate in the center of the cut. This pooling can allow those juices to escape as soon as you cut into the beef, leaving it tough and dry.
Don't overcook it. Overcook it's no good.
According to multiple professional chefs speaking to the website Steak School, setting your steak aside for 2 to 5 minutes, depending on its thickness, helps redistribute juices throughout the cut, contributing to a tender result. Since residual heat continues to cook the meat even after it's removed from the pan, it's important to take the cut off the heat source a few minutes early. The internal temperature of the beef will vary depending on the desired level of doneness, with celebrity chef Martha Stewart recommending medium rare steak should have an internal temperature between 100 130 and 135 degrees Fahrenheit, so you should take it off the pan while its internal temperature is 115 degrees to prevent overcooking. Slicing steak against the grain isn't just a cooking method, it's a game changer for your taste buds. In the context of meat, the grain refers to the direction in which the bundles of muscle fibers run through the cut. When you slice across these fibers perpendicular to their natural direction, you are shortening their length. This reduces the toughness of the meat, making it easier to chew. On the other hand, slicing steak with the grain leaves you with longer muscle fibers, which can turn a cut of meat stringy and unappetizing. Beef tends to have more pronounced muscle fibers than other meats. After all, cows typically weigh around 1,400 pounds. Cuts such as skirt steak and flank steak are particularly liable to this since they come from the more actively used parts of the cow. Since the connective tissues are usually grouped into bundles of between 50 and 300 strands, their direction is relatively easy to spot, which is great news for home chefs.